Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, They're Pretty Good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and today we're going to continue with the David Lynch series as well as the Twin Peaks series. More specifically, the motion picture Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, if you couldn't tell by the shirt that I'm wearing. I also have here the my Criterion Blu-ray, which I'll probably upgrade to the 4K at one of these flash sales, depending on how much other stuff I need to buy or need to buy. I also got the Laserdisc here. So yeah, let's get right into it. Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, 1992. But yeah, some quick backstory, real quick. This was initially supposed to be a trilogy of movies, I guess. Well, I guess what they really wanted to do was continue the series past 2 seasons. But when that wasn't going to happen, there was the idea to do 3 movies to continue the story, and this one was not received well, both by critics and fans at the time. Now it has been accepted into the canon of Twin Peaks, and way more people have come around on it. And I don't know if that's just since The Return came out, or if this kind of turnaround on it was happening before The Return came out. And it also might have been a big piece might have been the missing pieces, which those weren't released until like the 2000s, I believe, maybe even the 2010s. Either way, I mean, it was before The Return came out. So, but yeah, the missing pieces is just like basically a feature length compilation of deleted scenes from Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So, and it does fill in some gaps. It does have scenes with all of the missing characters from Twin Peaks that did not appear in the film. I mean, not all of them, but a good majority of them. And in the end, I think it was just more important for David to tell Laura's story rather than everyone else's story. So, and especially because Laura's story in Twin Peaks before this was basically just, she wasn't around. So, like, her story had already happened, and it was just uncovering little pieces here and there. And even though she's the, inciting incident of everything, it wasn't really about her. It was in a sense, but not really. And this was like the first time we actually really got to see who Laura Palmer was, not just how she is in the Black Lodge, basically, but just who she was and how she was. So, but yeah, let's get right into the movie. Opens with some TV static, basically, and that's like kind of the backdrop for the opening credits. As soon as those credits are done, we see an axe chop through the TV. Well, first we kind of zoom out so you can actually see that it is a TV. And then we see an axe chop down. We hear a scream. We hear no, and then a thud, and then, cut to black. So, obviously this is a murder that happened, but we just don't know whose murder yet. And then we see a dead body wrapped in plastic floating through the water, much like the opening scene of the pilot episode. But turns out it is not Laura Palmer. This is a year earlier, we'll find out. And this is the killing of Teresa Banks. And that she only was kind of mentioned in the series, really just as a possible connection to the killer. So, because it was similar circumstances, the dead body wrapped in plastic, the letter under the fingernail, just things like that. Then a very quick, jarring cut to Gordon Cole at the FBI offices, yelling, of course, saying, "Get me Agent Chester Desmond on the phone." And he's in Fargo, North Dakota. He's at something where they've pulled over a school bus that was like hijacked by drug dealers or something like that. There's like kids screaming and like all this chaos um, but yeah, he gets the call and he's like, "Hey, meet me in Portland, Oregon. I'll meet you on the flight line," that type of thing. So he gets to the airport. Gordon Cole is there, as well as Agent Sam Stanley, I believe. Yeah, Sam Stanley, played by Kiefer Sutherland. And oh yeah, and then Chester Desmond is played by Chris Isaac. So they're meeting at this private airport. Gordon Cole's there. The two agents are there. I don't know if Sam Stanley is an agent or if he's just working with the FBI. But anyways, but this is the first time they're meeting. So Cole introduces them. So this is Sam Stanley from Spokane, Washington, which is just a little bit up the road from here. But then he's like, "Oh, like I got a surprise for you." And then here comes this woman with a red dress and crazy hair and like just the patented David Lynch weird character. So she comes out and he's like, "This is Lil. She's my mother's sister's girl." And then he does like hands down here, and that it's just all this stuff that's so David Lynch, just being weird. And I mean, it all does like come together, but at the same time, it doesn't really matter what all this is. Then he turns to Sam Stanley, says, stick with Agent Desmond here. He's got his own MO, modus operandi." And then cut to them driving in the car, and immediately like Stanley's like, "So what was that all about?" And like Agent Desmond's like, "What, you didn't get that?" And then like they kind of like break it down. So basically, the Lil she had a sour face, which means that they're gonna have a problem with local authorities. And then she was blinking twice, which means trouble with higher ups. She had one hand in her pocket, which means they're hiding something. Oh, the local law enforcement is hiding something. And the other hand that wasn't in the pocket was making a fist, which means they're going to be belligerent. And then she was walking in place, which means there's going to be a lot of legwork. And then he's like, breaks down it's like, Cole said that she was his mother's sister's girl. And who's missing from that like equation? And they said the uncle. So that means that one of the local law enforcement people that they're going to have to deal with has an uncle that's in prison or something like that. Then he asks if he noticed that anything with the dress, and he says that there was alterations made to the dress using a different color thread, and I guess a tailored dress means drugs. So, and then the final thing that they bring up is the blue rose that she has pinned to her dress right there. And then you think we're going to get an explanation for that, and then he's like, "Do you know what that means?" And he's like, "No." Or he's like, "Oh yeah, like the blue rose, it's like some kind of project or something like that." And he's like, "Yeah, you're right, but I can't tell you about that." So, well, then why bring it up? So they get to the sheriff's office in, I believe it's Deer Meadow. It's Deer something. I think Deer Meadow. And then they get in there, and immediately we see what they're talking about with the having a problem with the local authorities. They're sitting in the waiting room, and the receptionist is just ignoring them, basically. And then one of the deputies comes out, and, he's not helpful, and they just, like, are making jokes, or it's like, "Yeah, why don't you go sit down and wait a while?" And it's like, "Have some coffee. It was fresh about 2 days ago." And they're just like, they just think that this is the funniest thing that has ever happened in their town, which it might be, And then finally, Agent Desmond has had enough. He grabs the deputy by the nose and kind of like forces him down. And almost looks like he like pulls his mustache off. Obviously he doesn't, but But yeah, this gets his attention, obviously, and basically putting him in his place and telling him like, hey, don't fuck with me. Just barges into the sheriff's office, and he's just as bad, if not worse. And then like reluctantly hands over the box of evidence, and then Agent Desmond asks where the morgue is, and it's out back, like basically in a shed. So they go back there. They start doing the autopsy. Oh yeah, first when they're like about to go into the morgue, the sheriff tries to pull the like, well, we close at 5, and then Agent Desmond's like, well, we'll lock up. So they're doing the autopsy. They notice that there's like a tan line on the ring finger. So she obviously had a ring at some point, but it is not there. And they check all the evidence and the personal effects, and there's no evidence of a ring. They notice the contusion under the fingernail, and of course, we know as people that have seen what comes after this, that there's a letter in there. It is the letter T under her fingernail. And then they know, I don't remember if, yeah, somewhere in the file it says like what she did for work, and she had worked at a place called Haps Diner. So they're done with the autopsy. It's like, I think 2 a.m. at this point. So they're like, well, let's go over the diner and get some food and, maybe get some information. So they go to Haps Diner. They're talking to some old man, like in the, I guess, the entrance or something. And there's like a guy with like a welding torch, like fixing something. And then like another dude that's just kind of like standing in the corner, more just like David Lynch ambiance characters that aren't really important to everything, but they're not important plot wise, but they're important everything else wise, because it's just like, I think that's just what makes his movies so interesting, and then that's something I've heard before. I don't even remember where it was from, but it's not like one of the biggest things with cinematography or anything like that. Like, what makes a movie a good movie is just make the frame interesting to look at, and obviously David Lynch is very good at that. But yeah, there's just this collection of characters in there, like who knows what they're doing, what the purpose of their work is, but they're talking to the guy, and then he's like, yep, like her name is Irene and it is night, don't go any further with it. And so then they're just kind of like confused by that. And I heard this line countless times. I've seen this, like, I don't know, maybe, not quite 10 times, or maybe 10, like maybe this might be my 10th watch, but every time I'm like, what, like, why did he bring that up? What does he mean by that? And just kind of didn't really think too much of it, and not enough to look it up, obviously. But it kind of clicked last night that it's a reference to like an old folk song, but I don't really remember when. I think maybe, I want to say the 40s, but I could be way off with this. But it's a song called "Goodnight Irene" by the Weavers. At least that's the version I know. And I don't know why it took me that long, because I do really like that song. It's one of those ones I listen to like a surprising amount for being as old as it is, and how different it is from the other stuff I listen to. But it just finally clicked last night, like, oh, he's talking about the song "Goodnight Irene," and I'm sure people say that to her all the time when it's nighttime and they're talking to someone named Irene, and then she just hates that joke. Like, it's like, I've heard it 1,000 times, like, don't even start with that, that type of thing. So I finally get it. And I don't even know if like there was really anything to get, but whatever. I was excited that I finally understood this line, because it always stuck out to me, even though I just it didn't click yet. So they're talking to her. They find out that she only really worked there for about a month. She was always late. And Irene's like, yeah, if you ask me, she probably had a little problem with the sniffing. So you're like, oh, you're saying she had a drug problem. And, like, Stanley makes some comment about like, asks Irene, like, do you ever take drugs, or you ever use cocaine or take drugs? And she's like, no, never have. Like I've never touched a drug in my life. And he's like, nicotine's a drug, caffeine's a drug, because she's smoking and, you know, drinking coffee. It's just like, them drugs is legal, like, idiot, you know, that type of thing. I forget what, but she says, calls him something then, and then asks Agent Desmond, like, who's the towhead, and, you know, that type of thing. But I forget what she calls him first, but not that it matters. I don't know why I'm getting hung up on these, like, little things. But then after this, you know, back and forth about drugs and everything, she says, like, one thing weird that did happen is a couple days before she went missing or died, her arm went completely numb. And Irene just kind of chalked it up to being part of the drug use, but you know, the agents are like, well, you know, like to each other, like, nah, that doesn't really make sense, that doesn't really add up, but you know, but it's interesting, so that's a new wrinkle to figure out. Then Irene lets them know where she was living, and it's at the Fat Trout trailer park. So they go there, they talk to the manager, which is Carl, played by Harry Dean Stanton. And at first he's all like, what do you want? You know, like that type of thing. And then he realizes that it's like FBI agents. And then he's like, oh, like, okay, like, what do you guys want to see? And then like, want to see Teresa Banks's trailer. And he's like, oh man, that damn trailer's more popular than Uncle's Day at a whorehouse or something like that. And that, so he reluctantly takes him over, and I don't want to say reluctantly, but you know, he doesn't want to be up this early. That's the problem. It's not that he's like doesn't want to, you know, help law enforcement like the other law enforcement. So then they're inside her trailer. They just looking all over for evidence. They see a picture of her where she is wearing a ring on the finger where there's the tan line and the missing ring. And it's like a little, I want to say jade. I don't know if it is jade, but it's at least that color. And it has like the symbol in it from, I don't remember if it was all the way in the finale of season 2, but at some point in season 2, when Major Briggs has the mark on his neck and the log lady has the mark on her leg, and they combine them, it's that symbol that's on the ring. So then Carl offers to get them some coffee. Like it's like, hey, I'm going to go get myself some coffee. Do you guys want some? And they're like, yeah, you know, sure. You know, so he goes, gets some coffee, brings it back. And they're sitting there sipping on their coffee, and while that's happening, some like old woman comes like hobbling up to the door that is open, and she's like super dirty, like just basically just like looks like she's, you know, hasn't showered in a week, that type of thing. She's got like an ice pack over her eye, and she's got a cane and everything, and she just comes in, and I don't even think she really says anything, but when she does, it like starts, you know, the camera starts getting all like wobbly kind of and like disorienting, and then Carl just starts like zoning out like real hard. He's just like staring like that, and then he gets like a vision of a telephone pole, which is somewhere in the trailer park because you can see the trailers on the side, and yeah, it's just like, you know, has like a number 6 on it. And that, you know, that, so he just zones out, and then he kind of comes back to it, and then it's just not really, you know, addressed at that point. So we see back at the sheriff's station, they're loading they load the body into like a FBI van, and Sam Stanley's going to take it back to Portland, basically, the main office, or not main office, but the FBI office in Portland. But then Chester Desmond tells him, like, hey, like, you get the body back to Portland, I gotta go. I have, you know, a couple more questions. I want to go check out her trailer one more time. So we see him head back there. He's walking around the trailer park, and there's like weird sounds going on, like, and like the vibe is like super different at this point. It's like, it's super ominous, like out of nowhere, but not until he gets near the pole that we saw earlier when Harry Dean Stanton was zoning out. So it's the pole with the number 6, and he's like standing by it, and there's just like this, that type of sound, and you could tell that he could sense something's off. So he continues to walk, and he goes up to this one trailer that has the lights on, and it's not even the like trailer that he was there to look for. I think he did want to like go check not only Teresa's trailer, but the trailer of the deputy that worked there. And so I think he just had like a feeling about this guy too. But yeah, he's just kind of like standing outside of this trailer for a while, and then he looks down under the trailer, and there's the ring like sitting on a mound of dirt. And then as soon as he kneels down to grab the ring and touches it, it like everything just fades to black basically. And then we cut to Philadelphia, which is the office, the FBI office where Gordon Cole is, and then we see Agent Cooper for the first time in the movie. Goes up to Cole and says, "Cole, it's 10:10 a.m. February 16th. I was worried about today because of the dream I told you about." But then, but then he doesn't elaborate too much, and then we see him like in a hallway, and he's looking up into like the security camera that's in the hallway. And then he walks into like the surveillance room, but he walks into the room where there's the live feed from that camera. And he's just like, he looks at it, and he goes back into the hallway and stares in the camera, and then back in the room with the monitor, and just kind of back and forth for a little bit until an elevator door opens, and out comes David Bowie as Agent Philip Jeffries. And he just starts walking down the hallway, and it's weird because Coop's looking at the camera and the feed, and it's matching up like, maybe there's like a second delay or like 2-second delay, something like that. But when he goes back into the surveillance room, he's still standing there in the hallway, and here comes Philip Jeffries down the hallway. So he's like, "Cole," he knows something weird is going on, and he goes running after Jeffries, and Jeffries is coming into Gordon Cole's office. He's like, "Philip Jeffries, where you been?" Because I guess he's been like missing for like a long time at this point. And they're like, "Cooper, meet the long lost Philip Jeffries," and Albert's in there too. And but like the tone is weird, and then Philip Jeffries like points at Cooper, and he's like, "Who do you think that is right there?" Oh no, first he says, "Oh, we're not going to talk about Judy," and just kind of starts bringing up this Judy that we don't know who he's talking about, who or what he's talking about. And then that's when he points at Coop and is like, "Who do you think that is right there?" And then the camera starts getting weird again, and then it like starts superimposing over another scene basically, but we're still getting the audio of them inside the FBI office and Philip Jeffries talking. And he's like, they're in a room above a convenience store, and then we're seeing inside the Black Lodge, but not the Red Room version that we've seen before. This is like, and we've heard mention of this like convenience store that they're up above, and it's just like every character of the Black Lodge is just hanging out in this room. We got the little man sitting at a table with Bob, and he's eating creamed corn, but he calls it garmonbozia, and we'll kind of find out what that whole thing is later. But and then there's like my favorite guy is the guy he's in a red suit, he's got a white mask on, and he's just like jumping around and stuff, just super creepy because like the mask has like a long nose and everything. But then like later in the same scene, the David Lynch's son, who's the grandson of Mrs. Tremond, they're both there, and so is like a woodsman that's just like sitting in the corner, and like another, maybe there's like 2 woodsmen, and I think that's everybody. Maybe Mike is there too. Yeah, I feel like he should be. Mike, the one-armed man. So then as we're like panning through this room and seeing all the like the different cast of characters, we hear Philip Jeffries saying like, "We live inside a dream." And then over at the table, we got the man from another place, the little man. He's holding up the ring, and he's like, "With this ring I thee wed," and then he just starts, maybe he's not holding it up, but he does say, "With this ring I thee wed," and then just starts like laughing, like this evil laugh. Then again, we hear Philip Jeffries talking at the FBI office, and he's like, I've been to one of their meetings, and he's just talking like about how they're, this like force of evil and like all this different stuff. And then like I said, the grandson was sitting on the couch, and now he has the mask on, but then when he moves it to the side, it's not, well, he moves it to the side and then we see his face. He puts it back and then he moves it again, and it's like a monkey face. And then after that happens, then the room where they're at starts to change into the red room. We see the red curtains appear, and we see like the chevron floor, and then we see Bob and the little man going like through the curtain. And then we cut back to the office where Philip Jeffries just disappears. And then they're like, he's gone. Like, he just disappeared. And then Albert calls the front desk, and he's like, I just called the front desk. He was never here, And then they run into the surveillance room, and they're like, well, there he is on the TV. So he was here. So like, what the hell's going on? Oh yeah, and then once they call the front desk, they find out that he like wasn't there, or he like never checked in, and then also that Agent Chester Desmond is missing. So then Cooper heads to the trailer park to investigate Agent Desmond's disappearance. And Carl's like, man, like how many times are you guys gonna come out here? Like I already told them everything, that type of thing. And he kind of fills them in like, this is what happened. Like he said he was coming to look at this trailer, so I pointed him that way, and then he's like, then Cooper just starts walking off, and he's like, where are you going? I said it was that way. He's like, I'm not going to that trailer, so Cooper just has like a feeling that he needs to check something out over here. So he goes to like where the trailer was, where presumably he disappeared, and that trailer's gone. But he's like looking, he's like, who used to live here? And he said an old woman and her grandson. And then he said the name, but this time he says the name was Chalfont. And he's like, come to think of it, the person that lived there before her was also a Chalfont. Like, that's weird, right? Two Chalfonts. So then I turn around and he's like, hey, is that Agent Desmond's car? And then they go look at it, and it just like has graffiti over the window. It just says, let's rock. Then we see Cooper doing one of his like messages into the tape recorder that he's going to send to Diane, and talking about like, he's like, I don't know, like I just have a bad feeling that this killer's going to kill again, and and who knows. And then smash cut to 1 year later, and we see the Twin Peaks, like the entering Twin Peaks sign, and then it's the music from the opening credits, and we're finally there. We're finally back in Twin Peaks. We see Laura Palmer walking down the street, going to school. She comes by Donna's house, and here comes Donna out to join her on the walk to school. Now, to note, Donna is played by a different actress in this movie. I think it was a scheduling thing with Laura Flynn Boyle that she couldn't do it. Probably because she was in Wayne's World, like the same year. So maybe it was that, but it could be anything. But regardless, in this movie, she's played by actress Moira Kelly. And I like both of them. I think they both bring something a little different to the character, but I think it works for each story. I think Laura Flynn Boyle worked better in the show, and Moira Kelly like works better for this story that is being told in this movie. Maybe that's just like accepting it, because it's, we're never going to get the other version of it. So it is what it is, but I think they did a good job. So they get to school. Laura goes off into the bathroom to do cocaine before class. We see her meeting with James in some back room, and she's just in a towel. I don't know if it's just like a back room off of the locker room or something, but they're having a conversation, and you can tell that Laura knows that she's in trouble, like she knows that something bad's gonna happen. She knows that she's gone too far with like the drugs and everything. So she's just like she's sure that that it's all over soon, and James is like, it's fine, everything's gonna be fine, that type of thing. And James is like, but here's the thing, James is more taking it like, no, like, he's more focused on their relationship than any of the other stuff. So he's just like, no, like we're in love. And that Laura's just like, I'm like a turkey in the corn. I don't know what that means. And then she says gobble gobble, which apparently that gets James all revved up, because then they start having sex right there in the storage room behind the girls' locker room. After school, we see Bobby running after her and Donna, and he's like, where were you? And she's like, I'm not gonna fuck, like, what, I don't gotta explain anything to you, just kind of, just is like upfront and mean towards him. And I don't, he deserves it, but I don't really know how else to say it. But and then kind of just puts him in his place, and then kind of cheers him up again, kind of just starts smiling at him, and then he smiles, and then everything's good, so that's just like kind of their relationship dynamic, I guess. Back at Donna's house, they're in the living room. Donna's laying on the couch. Laura's like laying on like an ottoman with her legs up over the back of a chair, and they're just like, they're talking about James and Bobby, because basically Donna's like, Bobby's an idiot, like, why don't you just break up with them? And then starts talking about James, and you could tell she's projecting her own feelings about James onto Laura, and she's like, but James is so handsome, and James is this, and and Laura's picking up on this, but not that she really cares, because I think she's just, she likes James, but not like that, that type of thing. Then Donna starts getting all like existential and shit, and says, do you think if you were falling through space, you would slow down after a while, or go faster and faster? And Laura's just like, faster and faster, and then eventually you would burn up, and then not even the angels would help you, because they've all gone, so she takes it dark real quick. Laura gets home after hanging out with Donna, and she's up in her room. She goes behind her dresser to get her secret diary out, and she's flipping through it, and then she gets to a point where she sees that there are multiple pages missing from her diary. So she freaks out. She drives straight over to Harold's house, and she's crying, she's upset, and she's like, he knows, and then he's like, no, like, he doesn't know because he's not real, like, but talking about Bob. But she's just like, the pages are missing, like, those are gone, like, if he's not real, then how did that happen, that type of thing. And then this is where she says, like, that he's been having me since I was 12 years old, and that so she's been getting sexually assaulted by Bob this whole time, like 6 years if she's 18. But then, she's just insisting, like, he is real. Then she starts saying, like, he wants to be me, and he's going to kill me if he can't be me, or something like that. So we're not really sure what that means. Well, I guess we are, because we know that Bob will go into people. We know that he is in Leland because of what happened in Twin Peaks Season 2. So basically what we're to gather is that Bob is done with Leland and wants to move into Laura, and she obviously doesn't want that. So, and then she's just getting like more and more like worked up, and then she says like, fire, walk with me. And then on the me, her face changes, and she's got like, like black lips, and her teeth and gums are like super bright, and her face is super pale. And this like freaks her out, and Harold, I think, a little bit. But I'm not even sure if Harold really sees that, but yeah, she breaks down crying, and then rushes out of there basically. And then she's like, this might be the last time I ever see you. And then just leaves. And then nothing he can do because he's agoraphobic and can't leave the house. So, oh yeah, but before she leaves, she does leave the diary there, which we know because it was found there in the show. So yeah, that we actually get to see the scene where she's like, this, keep it here. He doesn't know about you. Talking about Bob. Like, he doesn't know about you. So it is safe here. Like, he can't get to it. We cut over to, we see Coop and Albert talking, and Cooper's like, hey, I've been thinking a lot about that Teresa Banks case. And I think, I'm having different feelings about who I think the next victim will be. And then Albert's like, okay, like, break it down. Like, what does she look like? What, this stuff. And he basically does, like, describe Laura as, like, blonde hair, in high school, has a drug problem, sexually active, all these, like, different things. And then Albert's like, oh, congratulations. You just described, like, half of high school girls in America. So, like, that really narrows it down. Like, good job. And then they're like, well, what is she doing now? And then Cooper says she's preparing a large quantity of food. And then we cut over to Laura getting Meals on Wheels ready. So, and we know she does Meals on Wheels, and she delivers to Harold as one of her clients. But as she's getting ready out in the parking lot and she's putting the meals into the trunk, we see Mrs. Tremond and her grandson come up. And the grandson's wearing the white mask that we saw above the convenience store. Mrs. Tremond is carrying a painting, and says like, hey, like, this would look great on your wall. And it's just like a painting of a door in a room, like hardwood floor, floral wallpaper, and then there's like an open door like leading out into, probably a hallway or another room. So she gives it to her. It's just like, hey, this would look great on your wall, but in a less casual way, in a more like direct, But then the grandson starts saying, the man behind the mask is looking for the book with pages torn out. And then says like, he's there now. He's under the ceiling fan. He's going into the room, that type of thing. And then, she's basically describing the path from somewhere in the house into her room, basically. And so she's panicking. She sees Shelly coming out to like finish loading up the car for the Meals on Wheels, and she's like, Shelly, like, I'm so sorry, but I can't do this today. I gotta go right now. And then Shelly's just like, oh, all right. But yeah, she gets to the house, and then she's kind of like sneaking in because she doesn't know what she's actually gonna see. And she goes up to her room, and she slowly opens the door, and then we see Bob like behind the dresser, with his like evil smile and everything. She screams, she runs out of the house. She kind of goes into like the next door yard in the bushes, and she's kind of like laying down on the grass, like crying. And then she looks up and sees her dad coming out of the house, and she's like, oh my god, no, not him, just crying and crying and crying, because now she's like, this is her first realization that it's her dad that's been doing this to her this whole time. And I don't think she fully she's not to where she fully grasps the Bob concept, and she doesn't know how much of it is Bob, if Bob is even real, if it's just always been her dad and Bob is her interpretation of what's going on, or all of that. And it's just like, it's an insane amount of emotion and everything that obviously you would feel in this moment. And God forbid you have to feel anything like this. But yeah, so obviously big reveal for her. We already know. We've known since that episode aired 2 years ago, but this is we're seeing her finding this out for the first time. So she runs to Donna's house. She knocks on the door, and she's like still in tears. She's just like, Donna, like, you're my best friend, right? And like, I love you, that type of thing. And so yeah, Donna's like, yeah, of course, like, come in, so kind of cheers her up. So then when she does go home, this is when her dad is sitting at the table, and he's just sitting there like all still at the table, and just like asks her like, how's Donna? How was school? And then starts like grilling her about whether she washed her hands or not. And then he's like inspecting her fingers and just being super aggro about it, and just starts yelling at her. It's like, no, we're not going to eat dinner until she washes her hands, and like all this stuff, like just super over the top, like, do this, that type of thing. And then I was like grilling her about her necklace, because she's got the like half heart necklace, and we know that James has the other half, I believe, unless I'm forgetting it. But yeah, it's like, who gave you this? Like, is it your lover? And then Sarah's like, they don't call them lovers in high school. Like, but, also just trying to get him to stop in general. And Leland's like, Bobby didn't give this to you. I know that. So who gave this to you? And then just like grilling her. And then, finally Laura does get up and go wash her hands. But then we see her crying in the bathroom, obviously, and then later that night, we see her. She's in her room, like at her desk, like probably doing homework. And we see Leland like sitting on the edge of his bed, and he's still like got that like sinister look on his face. And then we kind of just see it like wash away from his face, and like almost like kind of like he snaps out of it, like Bob like left him momentarily or something. And then you could tell that he realizes he did something bad, but he might not really know what it was. And well, we know that he doesn't, because that's what he said, like when Bob like leaves him in Twin Peaks season 2. So we know that like whenever Bob is in there, that he doesn't remember what happened until he leaves him for good, and all those memories come flooding back. But so yeah, he has this realization, is like, I don't know what I did, but I know I did something bad and I hurt Laura. So he starts crying, and then Sarah comes over and kind of consoles, like asks what's wrong and everything. Then we see him come into Laura's room, and just obviously a very different energy than before. And Laura's very hesitant, obviously, like as she should be. And but he comes over, and then, but I think she can kind of tell that like this is different. This is my dad. But she's still obviously scared, because I don't know. It's hard to say. But yeah, so he comes over, he apologizes, and he's crying. He's like, I'm sorry, I love you, that type of thing. And it is like if not for everything else that's happening, would be a very sweet moment. But obviously, different movie. So after she like sits there and kind of absorbs everything that just happened, she remembers the painting that Mrs. Treeman gave her. And so she goes out to the yard, because she left it in the front yard, earlier. And so she goes and gets it, she puts it up on the wall, and then goes to bed. So then she has a dream, and her dream starts out, and she's in the room in the painting. So she goes to the door, and it's just another like wallpaper, the same wallpaper. And we see Mrs. Treeman, and she points at another door, like, keep going that way. And then there's her grandson in there, sans mask, or maybe he takes the mask off, and then he snaps, and it changes into the red room. We see Cooper and the little man there, and they're standing at like this like fancy table, and the little man says, I am the arm. Now, it took me a few times to realize that he is Mike's arm when he cut it off. And because he does, like, we know that Mike cut his arm off to, like, basically stop doing evil. But we didn't know that the arm became this guy, So now we kind of, like, know a little more. Not that it doesn't really affect anything, but now it's just another thing we know. But then, so he's telling this to Cooper, and then Cooper looks up, like, directly into camera, like, presumably to Laura, who's having the dream, and he says, "Don't take the ring, Laura." And then this is where we see her wake up, and it's still the middle of the night, and she wakes up, she's kind of, like, looking around the room, and then she turns to the other side of the bed, and there's Annie, like, the way that we saw her when Wyndham Earl took her into the Black Lodge. And she's in the same dress that we saw her when she was all bloody on the floor. I don't think that's the dress she was wearing. No, it's not the dress she was wearing when she got taken in, but it's the dress that when she was, like, changing back and forth between herself and Caroline. So she's wearing that dress, her, like, face is all bloody, and she's just laying there, and she says, "My name is Annie. I'm in the lodge with..." Wait. So my name is Annie. I'm with Dale, Cooper, and Laura. The good Dale is in the lodge and can't get out. So, yeah, like, good Dale is in the lodge and he can't leave. Write that in your diary. So Laura, like, turns away and then, like, looks at the other part of the room, turns back, and then Annie's gone. And, this kind of startles her. She gets up. She goes to, like, maybe go to the bathroom or something. And as she's, like, exiting the room, she looks at the painting and sees herself in the painting exiting that room. And then it's just kind of, like, back and forth between those two Lauras, basically. So then we get a scene. We get cut to the Johnson residence where Leo's yelling at Shelley about, like, cleaning up the house. Like, it looks like something got spilled on the floor or something like that. And he's like, "This is where we live, Shelley." And then it's like, you gotta have a good attitude. That's the key. Like, that, anyone will tell you that. It's just weird, like, aggro dude sayings that you're gonna hear from time to time. Like, everyone's heard someone say that at some point. But yeah, then the phone rings. He goes and picks it up. It's Bobby calling him, and he's like, it's like, "Leo, the football's empty." And then Leo's like, why are you calling me here? And, it's basically, it's about drugs. And he's like, there's no, like, are you telling me that there's no Santa Claus? Basically, like, that I'm not going to get cocaine from you. And so they hang up with each other. Oh yeah. And then he does say, like, to Bobby, it's like, "Hey, you still owe me $5,000. So, I'm not going to give you any coke until you give me that money." And Shelley, all she hears is, like, the $5,000. She's like, "Damn, like, what's this guy doing?" And then, so Bobby hangs up with him and then calls Jacques Renault immediately. And now he's going to get drugs from him. And, it's like, "Oh yeah, meet my guy in the woods and, you'll get this big score," basically. So we cut to nighttime and Laura's in the living room making herself a drink. And she's all dressed up. Donna comes in and she's like, "Hey, like, where are you going?" That type of thing. And, Laura's just being super vague. She says, like, "I'm going nowhere fast and you're not coming," that type of thing. And, Donna's just trying to, like, be a good friend, as she should be. And, Laura's just not having it and just, like, telling her to leave. And then, so then Laura just leaves, and Donna follows her. She goes to the roadhouse. She gets there, and before she goes in, the log lady comes up to her and says, like, just kind of, like, not embraces her, but, like, grabs her, just like, "When this type of fire starts, it's hard to put out." And then, a couple more things. And, just kind of like, "Hey, like, you're about to crash and burn," that type of thing. Just kind of like a warning from the spiritual realm that she's connected to. So she gets inside. Like, this freaks her out a little bit. She gets inside. Julie Cruz is singing. I forget which song this is. But she sits down at the table, and she's just like, overcome with emotion because of like the beautiful song and just everything she's been going through and everything. So she's just like breaks down crying at the table. And I think she clocks that Donna has followed her and comes in. And then she kind of just like pulls herself together and, lights a cigarette and is having a drink, and then makes eye contact with Jacques, who's behind the bar, because he's the bartender at the Roadhouse. He's there with these two dudes, and he kind of like, nods at Laura and then turns to these two guys and like gets their attention and kind of like then points over at Laura like, hey, that's who you want to go talk to. And so they come over, obviously like two skeezy looking dudes. They come over and sit down and pass Laura some money. So then Laura says, so you want to fuck the homecoming queen, don't you? And, then they're, trying to be like kind of flirty, but just like coming off gross as always. And then she says something about like, what, like, don't you go all the way is what the guy says to her. And so she grabs him and I think by the crotch, but you don't really get a good shot of where she's grabbing, but she just grabs him and is like, what? You gonna do it to me? You gonna go all the way with me? You gonna do it to me? Just super threatening, and then let's go. And then, then this is when Donna walks up and she's like, all right, let's boogie or something like that. Like, let's get out of here. And the other guy's like, oh, she's part of the deal. And then Laura's just like, no, like she's not, like, and then trying to tell Donna to leave. Donna grabs the guy's shot and takes it, and Laura's like, all right, and then makes out with the guy that she's sitting next to, then looks over at Donna like, what are you going to do about it? And then Donna kisses the other guy, and so they're like, all right, let's rock. So then we cut to this like dingy looking place. It's like all red light. It's smoky. There's a strobe going on. It's like topless women dancing next to the band and stuff, and then there's like women in lingerie dancing with each other, and just like everything just looks gross. Like, just like you're in a bad spot, but they're there, and Laura says, welcome to Canada. And then Jacques is there, and they go over to talk to Jacques, and then they just start like talking in like weird code or something like that. And, Jacques saying stuff like I'm as blank as a fart, and he's like putting a gun to his head, not a finger gun, not like an actual gun. Yeah, and then just like, I'm the great Went, and then Laura says, I'm the muffin, and all weird stuff, So then they start passing some beers around, but they're like passing them in a circle, and as it's getting to the one guy, Buck, who was the one that was making out with Laura, he's putting something in the beers, and then just like kind of, stir them up and then pass them around, and so it's some kind of drugs. We don't know what, and everyone's getting some. So, then, everyone's got their drink, and then Laura just says like, all right, chug a lug, Donna. And so they start drinking and dancing and everything. Laura's dancing with Buck. Buck just starts, pulling her top down out of nowhere. And then she finishes it, just takes her top all the way off and just dancing there. Donna's clocking this, but then before she can do anything about it, the drugs really start kicking in, and so she starts like, whoa, really feeling it and everything. Then we see Ronette Pulaski shows up. She's talking to Laura, and they get, they're talking with each other, and then here comes Jacques, and he gets in between them, and he's like, oh, my high school sandwich, just super gross, and then they start, I think Ronette brings up, she's like, oh, I can't believe it's been a year, and then they're like, since what? And they're like, oh, Teresa Banks, like she died a year ago. And then so they're talking a little bit about her, and then Jacques says like, "Oh yeah, she called me, and she wanted to like know what each of your dads looked like." And then Laura's just like, she asked about my dad. I think she's kind of putting it together, but she's also very out of it because of the drugs and alcohol, obviously. So yeah, they go sit down at a booth. It's Ronette and Laura on one side of the booth, and then Buck on the other side. And then Buck goes under the table and is doing something down there, and they're kind of like enjoying it. Well, as far as we know. But then Laura looks over and sees Donna laying on a table with her top off, making out with that other guy, and this is like what kind of snaps her out of it. She starts screaming. She's like, "Donna, no!" And then starts like trying to pull her clothes back on her and everything, and just get her out of there. And then I think Jacques does like end up like carrying Donna out, and so they get home. At some point, it's the next morning. Donna doesn't remember anything, and she's like, "How did I get home? How did I get in bed? Like, were you like mad that I like took something of yours?" And then Laura doesn't really want her to know what actually happened, so she's just like, "Yeah, don't wear my stuff, or don't steal my stuff," that type of thing. So Leland pulls up to come pick up Laura, comes inside. But when he sees them like on the couch together, he has like a flashback to seeing Laura and Ronette in lingerie sitting on a bed. And so we'll kind of fill that gap in over the next scene. But he's just kind of like, whoa, like, then kind of snaps back into it, and he's like, "Hey, like, we got to go meet your mom for breakfast. Like, let's go." So they're driving away. As they're driving down the road, we see like not a full RV, but like a pickup truck with the camper on top, that type of deal. We see one of those like swerving back and forth, and we can see that it's Mike, the one-armed man, inside. So they pull up. They get to a stoplight where all the cars are stopped. So yeah, they're stopped at this intersection. They're waiting for like a old couple to cross the road. Mike's like right behind him, honking at him, and then he like pulls around like all the way through the intersection and back around, so he's then facing the other way, so he can pull up right next to Leland. Leland's just like revving the engine like this whole time that they're sitting there, just like gripping the wheel and just staring straight ahead. Donna's like, or I keep saying Donna. Laura's freaking out, obviously. She's like, "What's that burning smell?" And then it's the engine, and then Mike's yelling at him, and he's yelling about the convenience store, and then he's like, "It's him, it's your father," and just going off, and then finally just pulls away. Leland pulls over into like the parking lot of a auto shop, and they're just like, "Why are you doing that to your engine?" But he's just like out of it. Laura's crying, like it's just all this chaos, and then he's flashing back to when he saw Laura and Ronette, and then we see him in bed with Teresa, and he's telling her that, "Oh, you look just like my daughter," while he's having sex with her. So that's great. Then we see where he shows up to the motel, because then she during that first encounter, she's saying like, "Oh, like if you want to, I have some friends that you might want to meet," that type of thing. And then they're all going to like get these other two girls with him and everything like that. So he's showing up at the motel for that encounter, and that's when he looks inside the window and sees Laura and Ronette, and then he's like, okay, like, "Nope, I can't do that." He's going to leave, runs into Teresa, and he's like, I chickened out, but then he pays her and then just leaves. So, and then as he's leaving, we see the grandson in the mask, like leaping over puddles, like in the parking lot and stuff. So, just more interesting stuff. So then back home, Laura's sitting there thinking about everything that just happened, and she's realizing that the ring from her dream was being worn by Mike, who was yelling at them, at the intersection, and it was also the ring that Teresa Banks was wearing back when they used to hang out. Meanwhile, Leland's having memories of when he's down in the living room thinking about when he killed Teresa Banks, and we see from the beginning. So when the axe went through the TV and we heard the thuds and the screams, that was Leland killing Teresa Banks. So then we see Laura going with Bobby out into the woods because this is going to be the whatever drug deal he was calling Jacques about. So they're in the woods. They got like a big ass flashlight. They're drinking. Laura has probably done coke at this point. Maybe both of them have, but they're walking, and then here comes the guy that they're there to meet, and it's the deputy from Deer Meadow, and he pulls out the bag and he's like, "Hey, I got the stuff." And when Bobby's going to grab the money, that guy, I think it's Mike, just not the Mike that Donna was dating and then Nadine was dating. But yeah, he pulls a gun on Bobby. He's real quick, so he pulls a gun and shoots the guy before he could shoot Bobby and Laura, and ends up just like blowing his brains out basically. So then, as like Bobby's there in shock that he just shot and killed a guy, I mean, it was self-defense, but so Bobby just killed this guy, and he's looking at the body laying there and sees like all the brain coming out of his head and everything, and Laura just starts laughing, and then he's like, "Why are you laughing? It's not funny. Like, shut the fuck up," and she just like is laughing and laughing. He's just like, "Bobby, you killed a guy. You killed Mike, Bobby," and just keeps bringing it up and keeps laughing, and Bobby's not very happy about that. So cut back to the Palmer residence where Leland is coming into the bedroom, and he's handing Sarah like a half glass of milk, and like is very insistent that she drink the whole thing. So this is where he's drugging her so he can have his way with Laura. And so she goes to sleep drugged, and she's having this vision of like a white horse that we saw her have back in the episode where Leland killed Maddie. And Leland exits the room. He turns the ceiling fan on in the hallway, and by Laura's reaction, I think this is kind of the indication that a Bob encounter is about to happen. We see her in bed, and she's kind of like writhing around. I think she did cocaine before she went to bed, and I think it's just kind of like, I think she kind of just, as a trauma response, just kind of surrendered to the moment. She like knows that there's nothing she can do about it. I'm guessing. I'm trying to put myself in that headspace. I'm assuming that's what's going on. But she's in the bed, and then we see Bob coming through the bedroom window, and then kind of just like slowly crawling onto the bed, gets on top of her, and then as they're having sex, Laura's like, "Who are you? Like, who are you?" She kind of says it a couple times, looks up, and Bob has now changed to Leland, and this is where she screams and like really realizes like, okay, this confirms it. Unfortunately, yeah, she screams. Next morning, Leland and Sarah are sitting at the breakfast table. Why do I keep saying Donna? Laura walks by and obviously doesn't want to go sit down, and Leland's like, "What? Like, is something wrong?" That's because he doesn't remember what happened, and now he's back to just actually being Leland, so he doesn't remember what happened. Laura like just won't talk to him, and just is visibly upset, and then leaves for school. While she's sitting in school, she's like tweaking out. It's like we're seeing the clock go like forwards and backwards, and she's just like, looks like she's on the verge of a panic attack. Basically, she's like crying and like almost hyperventilating, and then school ends, and she gets up and leaves, or everyone gets up and leaves. We see her in the basement at Bobby's house, and she's like making out with him, but basically just to get drugs from him, because like Bobby's not in the mood, because he's, I think, traumatized from killing somebody and burying a body. And so he reluctantly gives her some. She goes home. We see her like getting ready. She's putting on some like lingerie and pantyhose and stuff while she's on the phone talking to James. And she's like, okay, like I'll meet you in 15 minutes. And as soon as she hangs up, she's like, oh, why did I say that? She does not want to go talk to James. She sneaks out the window. James pulls up on his motorcycle. She gets on the back. They ride off into the woods where they talk for a little bit. And then while they're talking, and it's the same type of conversation that they've had like 1,000 times. And it's like, what, like, you're gonna be fine, and like, what's wrong, and what the hell's wrong with all these different things. And then she kisses him, but then she opens her eyes and sees behind him, and she sees something in the woods that we do not see, and like screams her head off and kind of runs away. No, screams her head off, and then just like tells James, it's like, just take me home. Like, she's like fed up with him. It's like, you're not going to listen to me, so just take me home. And so they're driving, but then at some point she just jumps off the motorcycle and then screams at James. It's just like, I love you, James, and then runs off into the woods. And then he, yells after her, but, he does, in the end, doesn't really do enough. But so she runs off. We see her arrive at, there's the red car parked. It's Jacques, Leo, and Ronette, like, waiting for her. So they get in the car. I'm guessing we don't see them get in the car, but then we see them at a cabin that Jacques has mentioned before. We know shit goes down at this cabin. That this is where it's all going to happen. Well, most of it's going to happen. We see them at the cabin. Like, they're just swapping with each other and making out and doing drugs and drinking and everything. At some point we see Jacques like on top of Laura, like tying her arms behind her back on some like dirty mattress on the floor, and she's not wanting to do that, despite his version of the story that he told Coop when Coop was undercover at One Eye Jack's. She does not like this, or so that's happening. But as they're struggling, they look up, and Leland is in the window. And so I think Jacques goes outside to like kind of see what's going on, and gets knocked out by Leland. Leo comes out to like check on Jacques, but he's out of it. Like, he's super like high, stoned, drunk, whatever, and notices like, hey, something's wrong with him. Like, he's like bleeding and not answering. So he goes back in, grabs his pants or whatever, and then gets in the car and drives off, leaving Laura and Ronette in the cabin. And then Leland comes in, ties both of them up, like, he's beating them up and ties them up, and he's pulling them away, and they're going through the woods, screaming and crying. And we see Mike like frantically trying to get there, like to try to stop what's happening. And he gets to the cabin too late, and then we see them at the train car, and Leland brings them into the train car, and they're tied up on the floor, and they're crying, and they got blood coming down their noses and around their mouth and everything, and they're just like pleading and begging. And this is an extremely upsetting scene. And so while that's going on, eventually he separates them, and he puts like Ronette off to the side somewhere, while Ronette's like off to the side, and she's like begging, like, she's like, please, like, like, don't hurt me, don't kill me, I'm not ready to die. And then all the sound goes away, and she looks up, and there's an angel like sitting there, and like kind of like reaches her hand down to her, and it's a super intense moment, because it's just like there's just been so much noise and chaos and everything, and then just to take the sound away like that, and just this like crazy otherworldly image, and then it's just like almost like a distraction for Ronette from what's happening over there. And but yeah, then she gets and kind of just like almost like a little like this tiniest bit of comfort or something. And then after that happens, Leland like comes and knocks her out and throws her out of the train car. And Mike is there, and you think he's gonna like take her, but I think he's just like, I think he knows that, okay, if she looks like this, even though she's not dead, like he's not gonna mess with her anymore. And then we see back in the train car, Leland's just going, walking around in circles around Laura. She puts the ring on, and then we hear Leland, and he's just like, don't make me do this, don't make me do this. And he's changing back and forth between Bob, and then then he kills her, and we see him get the plastic out. He wraps her up in the plastic. He jumps out of the train car with Laura's body over his shoulder, sees Ronette, like kind of nudges her with his foot and thinks like, yeah, she's dead, don't gotta worry about her. And then we see him putting the Laura's body into the water, and she kind of floats away. Then he heads to the grove of sycamore trees. That's the entrance to the Black Lodge. We see the curtains appear. We see him go in. He gets to the main red room where Mike and his arm are sitting in the chairs next to each other. And this is a crazy weird scene, like a visual, I mean. And so Leland's just standing there at first, and then we cut over to their faces, and then they kind of like are looking up at him, and then kind of look down and like kind of sweep like that, and we see Leland like almost like floating, like his feet are stuck at like one point, and there's like a almost like a cable like attached to him, and it's kind of just like swinging around like that, but like floating like near the ground and everything. It's a very unsettling visual, but super well done. And then he's just like floating there, and then Bob standing next to him, and then in unison, Mike and his arm say like, I want all my garmonbozia, but this time it has a parentheses next to garmonbozia, and it says pain and sorrow, or maybe pain and suffering. Of course, that's the one thing I didn't write down. But either way, so it's like that's what that represents, and that's why there was like all this weird emphasis on creamed corn over the series and stuff like that. Like basically, it's the this is what the evil side of the Black Lodge, this is what they feed off of. And that's why it's just like all this like evil and fear and pain and all this different things. Like that's why they're doing this. It's their sustenance basically. And so we see like they kind of like reach into like, puts his hand over like Leland, and then like throws it, and then there's like blood all over the floor, and then that fades away. And then we get like, we see the spoonful of creamed corn, but it's like going backwards up into, it's going into the mouth, but because the spoon is like completely clean when all of the cream corn goes in the mouth, it's like it was done backwards. It's basically like mouthful of cream corn, spit it out onto the spoon, but it looks cooler going back in. You could tell it's like not just like being slurped. So then we cut into, I don't know if one of the other red rooms, but this time it is Laura sitting on the couch, and then Coop is standing next to her, and he's got his arm on her shoulder, like just looking down at her, like in a it's like it's gonna be okay, like in a comforting way. And then we see a bright light, and then Laura looks over, and then there's another angel like sitting there, and then as she's like looking at the angel, then she just starts smiling, but she's still crying, and then it's just like all the emotions are flooding to her, and like it's almost like is very cathartic in a way, and I think it's just like meant to signify to us that, you know, it, even though this is a terrible thing that happened, at least she's no longer suffering, I guess. I guess that's my interpretation of it. I think that's probably like a pretty cold take interpretation of it, but yeah, that's just how I take it, because it's just like it's such a hard watch. Like, if you really think about it, if you really think about everything that's like happens in this movie, it's tough, and I think you need that ending to like kind of make you feel okay for having witnessed all this like terrible stuff. You know, it's just like a, hey, at least, you know, at least it's over, you know, that type of thing. You know, kind of like if you have a loved one that's like suffering through cancer. I mean, you know, it's very different things, but I think this particular feeling, I think, is similar, where it's like you have this person that you know is suffering and you love them and you care about them, and there is like a little bit of relief when, like, the tiniest bit, like, obviously you want them around, but there is that little tiny bit of relief that's like, at least they're not in pain anymore, at least they're not suffering, you know. So I think that's what it's like supposed to be. I think that's what the ending means. But it's like it's so weirdly beautiful for coming like just minutes after this horrific scene of a man murdering his daughter, and it's not even just like a quick thing. It's just like, it is a good chunk, like a good 10 plus minute chunk of the end of the movie. And so I think it's surprisingly beautiful for having come after the least beautiful scene, you know. But yeah, that's Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Yeah, this is a great one. I think it I don't know. It's like, David Lynch is one of those directors. Like, his filmography, I think pretty much everything is tied for first, and then Dune's at fourth place. You know, it doesn't get a medal, but it's at least like, hey, it's good. You know, I enjoy it, but man, it's a crazy movie. I think the only reason I don't watch this one more often is because it's almost like I feel like I need to rewatch all of Twin Peaks again. And it has to be like part of this like massive rewatch, and it really doesn't. Like, I think this does stand alone on its own. Now I have no way of knowing what it's like to watch this first and having no, you know, sense of Twin Peaks as a show. I know there are people that have watched it like that, and, you know, I've heard on like other shows talk about how, you know, someone may have seen this movie and then didn't even know that Twin Peaks was a show, and then like, oh my god, like, there's all this other stuff, and that has to be pretty jarring, especially to go from like such like an insanely surreal dark movie to a soap opera for network TV, you know. But yeah, it's a great movie. I wish people liked it more when it first came out, and then maybe we would have got those other two movies. But maybe if we had got those other two movies, we wouldn't have gotten The Return, you know. So we don't know. And maybe those other two movies would have gotten in the way of Lynch making Lost Highway, or maybe wouldn't have gotten Mulholland Drive, you know. So it's, you know, it's easy to sit and speculate about like, oh man, like, or to dwell on the things that we never got or never will get. But I think in the end, everything happened the way it was supposed to, you know. I think I'm willing to sacrifice those two movies if we get The Return. So and that's great, you know, and we'll get there. But yeah, thank you guys for listening, or watching, whatever, whichever. Good stuff. Next week I'll hit you with another take on Lost Highway. I know I've already done that one, but same with Blue Velvet. At least I don't feel like I need to go as in depth if I've already covered it before. So I'll try to keep that one a little brief. You guys get a little short episode, I guess. Maybe I'll just spend a whole hour talking about the scene with Robert Blake at the party, but because that is my favorite part. But yeah, thank you guys again. This man, I just love this movie so much. I might just watch it again. I might throw the Laserdisc on while I'm going to sleep tonight. So, but yeah, thanks. Tune in next week. Please remember to like, subscribe, smash that like button. Write those reviews, only if they're good. Yeah, thank you guys. See you next week. Bye.